Sweet. Episode 3. I am joined with my mate, my fearless leader on a cricket field, and someone that I have spent a lot of time with over the last 3 years now.
Yeah, it'd be
Um,
about that. Yeah.
yeah, I've spent a lot of time together, sort of learning a lot about life and sort of relations, and sort of growing fairly close, I would say. And um, someone that I really enjoy spending time with and look up to a lot of the time. It's someone that, again, another person that inspires me and has a lot of stories that I've learned from, and someone I hope that a lot of people can learn from today. So, welcome, George Tate, everybody.
Thanks, mate.
Uh,
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
um, yeah, you just tell us a little bit about yourself. Any interesting facts about George Tate, where he's been, what he's up to?
Yeah, 22 years old. Obviously, play a lot of cricket. Oxford Cricket Club, Oxfordshire. University at Loughborough. Studying physics. About to go into my fourth year, master's year. So, looking forward to that. And looking forward to this today as well.
Yeah, so on. So George and I sort of, as I said, he's become our captain at Oxford Cricket Club, and a lot of my relations with the club have been through George, and a lot of the stories that I have and my favorite memories involve George and sort of the past, a bit about mental health. We sort of had chats about that, but also about challenges we both face in day-to-day life and at uni, and sort of how our lives compared, sort of being 12 months apart. I think we've sort of done quite well, sort of learning in our college journeys. But um, being a leader, George,
Mm.
how do you find how do you find being a leader in an environment like Oxford Cricket Club at such a young age?
Well, being a leader in a more general sense, I think I've it suits my personality quite well. Um, it's not something I shy away from. I quite enjoy the feeling of being a leader, um, and trying to be successful. And then in terms of Oxford Cricket Club, particularly, it started off as quite a challenge because we were in a side that had a bit of an uncomfortable environment around it at times. Certain things that were quite hard to manage on and off the field. Um, but more recently, obviously, I took over the captaincy about this time last year. I think it was. I think this Saturday coming up would have been my first game as captain. So, but more recently, particularly the last month, last 5 weeks, you'll probably second this as well, has been fantastic. I think um, leading a team like we have now compared to a team that we had when I took over um, is a drastic change. I find it an incredibly pleasurable experience where, from a cricketing perspective, everyone I think knows their roles really well and everyone's executing really well. So it makes my job a lot easier than when I took over, when um, I felt like every plan I made had to have a plan B and a plan C, and it was quite hard to commit to one thing. There's still challenges around, selection, managing certain players, but I've learned how to do that better than when I took over, and the challenges themselves have become easier. So I've really enjoyed it. There have obviously been stressful times. There's no reward without stress as a leader, but it's been really enjoyable.
So what's been the main difference between the two sides a year apart? What?
I think we've now got a group of 11 players that really want to play together and play for each other. I think when I took over, you could say we had some individuals that weren't necessarily 100% dedicated to Oxford Cricket Club and winning games for Oxford Cricket Club, which is all I want from us. The ability is a separate thing, but I think you can compensate for lack of technical ability if you have the right mentality over 11 players in a side.
Now, how do you communicate that message to people? So obviously, I know how you've done it this
Yeah,
year, but for them that aren't able to see you in person, how
yeah.
do you communicate such a message? They just want people to play for a
For the
purpose.
team. Yeah, it's difficult because certain players, particularly if they have aspirations in the game, are obviously going to have their own agendas, and I have myself that. But each person you need to communicate with slightly differently. I know, take the example for you, I never really need to put a rocket up your ass, if that makes sense. I don't know if I can say that, but I never need to give you like a stern talking to in terms of what I want from you, because A, I know you're always trying your best, and B, that's not the way to get the best out of you. But if I'm going to communicate to someone that I think their attitude towards a team is not where it could be, I think what I've learned is you have to have the difficult conversations in as straightforward a way as possible while still trying to be mildly empathetic. I think edging around the subject and saying things in a way that sugarcoat it isn't beneficial to anyone. I think the best way to do it is not give the person who you're talking to any chance to misunderstand or misconstrue what you're saying to them, but still communicating them that message in a way that doesn't make them feel overly offended. I think if you're telling someone they're doing something wrong, they're obviously intrinsically going to be offended to some sort of degree, but you want to make the message more not you're doing this and this wrong, but okay, you can do this better. Here's what I need from you to do. Focus on what you want them to do differently instead of just pointing out what they're doing wrong.
So would you say communication is your top priority as being a leader, or what are the main skills required?
I'd say the two it's equal with tactical things. This is in cricket. In say a corporate environment, it'd be slightly different. You'd be more focused on communication. But in cricket, it's sort of there's the two pillars are tactical things and then how to get the best out of players with communication. Yeah.
And do you feel like at this point now, having learned a lot in the last year, that's sort of something that you can sort of almost tick off that you've grown, not necessarily perfected, but you have grown massively in terms of communication?
I'd say so, yeah. There's still points I'm working on, like I was saying about being direct is something that I still sometimes struggle with, particularly with players who I know are more likely to have a negative reaction to certain messages like that. It takes, I have to talk myself into doing it. But
how do you feel in those situations when you actually, as a leader, you have to go put yourself in an awkward situation?
I think the best thing for me personally is think about what happens if I don't say this. What negative things can happen if I don't nip this in the bud right now? And then I think about that and I go, okay, that's not an option. You can't let that happen to your team and your players. That's not in the question. So you have to put yourself through this uncomfortable situation now. Otherwise, it's going to get worse. Yeah. That's all that's going to happen. And then you kind of go, okay, well, it doesn't matter how I feel; it has to be done.
Yeah. And then when we talk about leadership, do you think people need a title to be a leader? In life, are you looking at sort of like here, like you have corporate bosses, or in cricket you have captains, or do you believe that some people could actually lead without having titles?
I'd definitely say you don't need a title to be a leader. I think having the title of a captain or a boss of a team in a corporate environment doesn't make you a leader. I think having leadership qualities like communication, the ability to motivate people, and to an extent be a role model, that's what makes a leader, not the title. I think you have to earn the title through those things. In some situations, people are leaders without having that title, and in some situations, people have the title without having the necessary qualities. And when you get a situation where people have both, they have the qualities and the title, I think that's where things become the best they can be.
And as a leader, do you ever think it's an isolated environment, or do you ever feel like making the step from being a player into a leadership role of a captain that sort of isolates you a little bit from teammates, or or is there a way that you actually find a way that you can spread out like responsibilities in that, or how do you go about it?
I think there is definitely an element of that, because that I feel now I'm leading the team, the outcomes of the team are more my responsibility than it is anyone else's, and that's not just cricket. If a corporate team is not doing very well, it's the boss that gets fired. Having said that, I'd say the only times where I may feel slightly isolated is if I'm making a tactical decision for the team that other players might disagree with. But the best way to combat that, in my experience, is to communicate your thought process to other players. If you have the time, say on the cricket pitch, to discuss something with someone who has often very good ideas or something like that, or relying on certain players when you may feel stuck as to what to do. That's the best way to combat that, because at the end of the day, you're not isolated. And if you're feeling isolated, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, when I say a good thing, I mean you're feeling like you've got all the power and nobody else can say anything. That's a really negative thing. And also, if you feel like nobody is interacting with you the way they are each other, that's also a really bad thing. So that's something that I've tried to do is let the players know that their inputs matter, because that lessens the gap, if that makes sense. And yeah, it goes back to communication again.
Yeah, I think from a player's perspective, I think you've managed that really well over the last year. And I said to you a couple of weeks ago that as a club, never mind just a team, we wouldn't be in a position we are without people setting an example from the top. And I think, as we've discussed in the club, that we want our first team to set the standard for the rest of the club and try to have a filter effect. I think having someone like you, and we have Rupert, our coach, who sort of, we're now setting a bar for everyone. And I think having a clear message has been really, really beneficial for us. In terms of accountability, obviously you said you feel like you're responsible for how the team's results.
Yeah.
But who holds the rest of the people accountable for when they're not necessarily in that team environment, but we are acting as individuals in life? Who's responsible? Because we've had examples where we've had other players hitch up on a Saturday morning after having a big Friday night out, but they're the only ones that hold themselves responsible, but we can't do anything about them. So where's that sort of lie with you?
I think in a general life sense, the only person who's accountable for what they do is themselves. I'm always of the opinion that luck is not necessarily a thing, and if you're a person who goes through life feeling like you've been unlucky and everything's against you, I'd sort of encourage someone like that to say, okay, what can I be doing better, so that even if bad things happen and I'm extremely unlucky, how can I make the best of that situation? And then in a cricket sense, let's take the example of, someone's had a big Friday night out and they've rocked up on a Saturday morning dusty and they're not ready to play. There are certain players who can get away with that. We've seen people in our league, not even in our team. So I'll mention one example by name because they're not in our club, is someone like Elliot Callis at High Wycombe, outstanding player. And, he's told me about a number of occasions where he's had a massive night out and then gone and played really well the next day. They not necessarily have a license, but don't, in that specific case, don't do it unless you're going to perform anyway. I know that if I go out the night before, I'm useless the next day. But I think it is on if a player does that, it is on the team and the leader to an extent to have a quiet word with that player and say, look, if you're going to make a habit out of this, you're not going to continue to be part of this team, which is like what we were saying before. It's a very difficult conversation to have with a player, but it's one of those necessary things. And if a player's doing that and then continuing to perform, it's not really our business. But if they're doing that and not performing, that's when it becomes an issue. So if people want to conduct themselves like that in life, and they're happy with the results, then it's about whether we want to let them be a part of our team and our culture, having done that. And if they're not a negative impact on the performance of the team in the dressing room, I'm less inclined to take a negative stance towards it. But it's obviously not the best way you can be going about it. And if you can't back it up with your performances, then you either stop doing it or you don't play for the team anymore.
Yeah, I'm a big thing of that, and I think we also think about accountability in the positive sense that we have players, and we had one of the guys come up on Tuesday and train by himself, and sort of I think a lot of what a good positive team environment, sort of what we've sort of built up now, is guys are starting to train more away from just the team.
Yeah,
and I think that again comes from us being at the top.
Yeah,
how much are we willing to be around one another, and almost I find I'm more accountable for my actions now because I'm worried about the next guy next to me.
Yeah,
and I think that's
it's competition, isn't it?
Yeah,
competition. If you create an environment at the top for this club, for example, where to get into the first team, you're going to have to be better than someone who's training more than the club training on a Thursday night. You're also going to have to do that, and it's only going to have positive benefits for yourself and for the club. So yeah, you're absolutely right in saying that it creates, if you take accountability and responsibility in whether it's extra training or whatever it is, then it's only going to be a positive outcome for everyone.
And as a leader, sort of in life, and sort of thinking a bit more away from the club now, how do you ensure that you're always leading or setting a good example? Is that something that you ever thought about?
At times, yeah. In certain family situations, I have a couple of younger siblings that I don't have a particularly close relationship with, but I do sometimes think about setting an example for them. But I think the point of setting an example is doing it for yourself, and then naturally other people will look at will see what you're doing, and either want to follow, or they might, try and bring you down or whatever. But the point of setting an example is to do it, is to be the best, do the best things that you can do, and then naturally other people will want to do the same, either in competition with you or to follow your lead, which both things, in my opinion, are good things.
It's healthy competition.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, which I find quite interesting, because obviously the last few years at the club, we actually really haven't had any competition with anyone, and now all of a sudden, so seeing this year, a couple of new faces, and everyone's just sprung up a little bit. It's like, okay, cool, actually, I need to be better, and whether that's out of spite or whether that's actually, okay, this guy's he's better, so I need to push myself to be better.
Yeah. And if it's, sorry to
go ahead.
But if it is out of spite, it's unless it's a personal thing, and like say, there's another off spinner batter who comes to the club and he's better than me, I'm gonna feel some kind of way about that because he's putting my place inside in jeopardy. But as long as I don't have any personal issue towards that player and take it out on him, it's almost a good thing that I'm working extra hard in because of what that player's doing in a negative way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think competition, there are certain people who don't want to be in that environment. They want to be in a safe environment, but to compete at a high level, you have to not only be better than your opposition, you have to be better than other people in your club to earn your spot. And that's only a healthy thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
I think that's also a general rule in life.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no point. We speak a lot about cricket terms, but cricket is just part of our life and the way we communicate. But generally in life, and I've seen it working at schools, and you've probably seen it at uni, like especially academics, and even like coming from a state school background, you've had to work a lot harder to get to where you are. And as a result, for me personally, I think you've excelled more in a lot.
I'd hope so. Yeah, I think with the state school thing, absolutely. The kids my age from private school would have early on in their career had a lot more opportunity to train and play matches and play against other private school kids who have had the same. But yeah, I just, like I was saying earlier, I take the approach of do everything I can, and that's sort of an external factor that I could look at and go, well, if I was put in that position, I'd be doing a lot better, but it's irrelevant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you've got to try make do with what you have. Yeah.
Play the hand you've got.
Yeah.
Don't play a hypothetical hand that you haven't got. And complain about whether you'd have done better with that hand. Play the hand you've got.
Yeah, and it's something that I really enjoy, and it's a sort of a quote that's sort of come up in my mind. How much can I do with the least amount? Yeah. If I can outperform someone when I have so much little available to me, but I can do so much, imagine what will happen when I get exposed to having more.
Exactly.
And that mentality, I think, has helped me, at least personally, is especially sort of in the coaching realms. Like, we just think about, I was using equipment as an example. Like, for me, what can I do with a stump and a ball?
Yeah.
Like, if I just have that, I know I can still run an hour session with about 20 kids.
Yeah.
Whereas I think other people might not see the positives in having like so little, but then being sort of trying to be a leader for those kids. It's trying to say, okay, cool, let's make do with what we have and excel from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy and way of putting it.
Yeah. And then, so I like finding out about stories of people.
Yeah.
any story that springs to mind about anything that you learned in your life. It can be anything from anywhere.
Oh, yeah, I think, well, the one that comes to mind that's particularly tied into what we've been talking about competition and stuff. I think about when I think I was under 12s, and there was the county trials. So at that age group, there's the county side under 12s, and then there's the district sides, which is 4 sides based on your region in Oxfordshire. And in my first selection, I didn't get into any of those things. And my mum got an email, picked me up from school, and said, you didn't get into any of them. And I was quite upset. And she said to me, do you really want to do this? And I said, yeah, I really want to do it. And she said, well, the only thing you can do is make it impossible for them not to pick you. That's the only way you can go about it. And I said, okay. And that's kind of like, I then the next year got into the district side under 13s. Next year I was in the county side under 14s. Next year I won Player of the Year in the under 15s. And I was then looking at trying to get onto Sussex Academy, but they weren't particularly interested. And it was the same thing again. It was make it impossible for them not to pick you. And the thing with Sussex hasn't worked out how I would have wanted it to at that age. I did a couple of EPP sessions at Hove. Then they would kind of like, no. And I had 2 years away from even the Oxfordshire Academy, you'd call it. And I was just doing my age group stuff. And then my final year of youth cricket, I was put back into the Oxfordshire Academy, but never got the chance to go back up to Hove, down to Hove, because they were looking at, for those who don't know what Hove is, it's the Sussex County ground where they do all their training and stuff. But they were looking at sort of younger players at the age that I was when they first looked at me. But then because of that, even though I didn't get picked in that environment, there were so many positive things that came from that. I was good enough to be selected to go out. I still had to apply for this, but there were players that applied and didn't make it through to go out on the ICP in Sydney. And then from that, got an opportunity at Northants Academy. Again, that didn't work out. But I've then, kept pursuing it with minor counties cricket, and hopefully at Loughborough as well. Some other opportunities at other places might come from that. But the story that I suppose I'm trying to convey is the message of, if you want something, make it impossible for it not to happen. If you really, really, really want it to. Yeah.
What have you learned sort of from those rejections of Northants and Sussex? What you obviously said, make it impossible for those not to pick you, or like for it not to happen. But what else have you learned from that?
I've learned that when you say make it impossible for them not to pick you, it doesn't mean right now. I'm still living by that, in that sense of, one day it will be impossible for them not to pick me. It doesn't have to be tomorrow, it doesn't have to be next year, but I think it's slightly different at this age. I'm graduating university next year. I don't want to be 26 still, calling myself an aspiring professional cricketer because I need to live and earn money. But right now, it's still make it impossible for them one day not to pick you, and do everything you can to be ready when they call for you, and to persevere. And you're obviously going to feel negative emotions when you get rejected. That's completely normal. But it sounds sort of cringy and overused, but use it as motivation to keep going. And then you might have the opportunity with them later on. You might have the opportunity for somewhere else, and then you can rub it in their faces. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think a good thing is, like, I like to use a negative situation to guide you into something positive. Yeah. I think that's something that I've noticed with you and sort of a lot of guys in the club now, is that we turned, like last year, we had our worst season probably in club history, and we've now turned that into a situation where we all felt that negative emotion, but we're now pushing to a positive route. And I think it's all about how can you transfer your negative emotions and turn it into something greater, turn it into a greater cause.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, for us, I mean, when we finished last year, having not won a game, finished dead bottom of the table, those are some really bitter, sour. Yeah, they were really tough. And I think for me, I think there was a large contingency at the club that thought I was going to leave. And obviously, I'd taken over the captaincy for 8 games or whatever the second half of the season. And I was just kind of like, I'm not going out like this. This is not how this story is going to end. So that's, an exact example of that, of the negative situation we had. We've all come together as a club to rebuild and bounce back. And then, when we go back up to Division 1, whenever it is, if it's after this year, if it's after next year, we're ready.
Yeah.
We're ready.
So, yeah. Thank you, George.
No stress, mate. Cheers, bud.
As a player, as a friend, having you stick around means a lot to all of us. And I think hopefully this message is now clear to everyone that we are here. It's not just individuals anymore. We are one, and we're all behind leaders. And it takes people like George for us to actually have an identity and have leadership qualities where we're now able to bounce off people and have those groups of communication. It's so important. Keep going, everyone. Resilience. Okay,
100%.
Make sure. Or was it impossible?
Make it impossible for them not to pick you in whatever aspect you want to take that. Yeah.
That's the key message.
Yeah.
So thank you, George. Appreciate your time.
Cheers again, mate. Thank you very much.
Looking forward to training later.
Yeah.